Welcome to Good Enough with the Trauma Therapist, a podcast dedicated to empowering you to take control of your life, learning valuable strategies for healing and looking at mental health through a trauma-informed lens. Get ready to feel empowered and confident in managing your symptoms. And now, here is your host, licensed clinical social worker, EMDR therapist, and certified clinical trauma professional, Jamie Vollmoeller.
Welcome to Good Enough. I am your host, Jamie Vollmoeller, and today we are going to be talking about New York State's Proposition 1 on the ballot November 5th. It's super important, guys. This is our Equal Rights Amendment equivalent for New York State. So for those of you who don't know, New York State doesn't protect anything in our Constitution besides religion and race. There are laws in New York State that do protect gender, reproductive rights, disabilities, age. All these other classes are protected via laws, but there are significant issues with them not being in our Constitution. So today we're going to go through that because there's a lot of misconceptions going around about Prop 1. And I think that most New Yorkers agree with this. So let's get rid of the disinformation and talk about facts. So let's go into it. We're going to go through what it is, the myths that are circulating around, what it's actually going to do, and why it's necessary no matter who gets into office. Okay. So if you haven't seen the signs, here's some pictures, guys, for those of you who are watching this on YouTube. A lot of the signs are saying vote no, save girls' sports, protect parental rights. I've heard things about it's going to give illegal aliens rights to votes. This is all like deeply misinformation. So what is it? So New York's Equal Rights Amendment is defined as the following. So it says, no person shall be denied the equal protection of the laws of this state or any subdivision thereof. No person shall, because of race, color, ethnicity, national origin, age, disability, creed, religion, or sex, including sexual orientation, gender, gender identity, gender expression, pregnancy, pregnancy-related outcomes, and reproductive health care and autonomy, be subjected to discrimination in their civil rights by any other person or by any firm, corporation, or institution, or by the state or agency of subdivision of the state pursuant to the law. Pursuant to the law is a very important statement. Nothing in this section shall invalidate or prevent the adoption of any law, regulation, program, or practice that is designed to prevent or dismantle discrimination on the basis of characteristics listed in this section, nor shall any characteristic listed in this section be interpreted to interfere with, limit, or deny the civil rights of any person based upon any other characteristics identified in this section. So most important thing here is it's pursuant to the law. So this isn't like this goes into effect and, all these changes are just going to automatically happen. They're going to be litigated. We will get into that. But this is what it actually says. So it's expanding the Constitution from protecting just race and religion to protecting race, color, ethnicity, national origin, age, disability, creed, sex, and all those other classes they listed. Very, very important because I think most New Yorkers feel like we're already a state that our Constitution protects that, but we're not. We're not. Our laws just protect it. And there's issues with that. So why is it needed? Amending the Constitution requires a complicated constitutional process, and the ERA has undergone this process. It takes about 4 years. So it has to get through 2 rounds in the Senate. So like 2 legislative bodies have to come through and then we vote on it. So this is a very, very long process. Whereas laws are changed by our representation, our legislators in our state Congress, right? So if new legislators come in and they want to change those laws that are protecting discrimination in New York State because maybe they don't agree with them anymore, they can do that. And our Constitution in New York State would not protect us from them changing those laws. And those laws are much easier to change. So there are some discrimination laws in New York State already, the New York Human Rights Law, the New York Reproductive Health Act of 2019, and the Marriage Equality Act of 2011. Basically what this does is takes it up to another level. So there's no constitutional protection for these categories. So the Human Rights Law, the Reproductive Health Act, all of the categories that those laws are protecting, there's no constitutional protection, which means that the judicial review for alleged discrimination is based on intermediate scrutiny. So it's a lower standard than what constitutional protection guarantees. So it would just help to make these rights a lot more solid. Like they have a lot more backing if they have that constitutional protection, because the level of scrutiny under the law is higher for constitutional protections, which means you're more protected if you're one of those classes, which is good. That's what New Yorkers have always been about. Like we do our best to just be like, yeah, live and let live. Laws can be changed each legislative session. So this is what I was saying. If we don't pass this amendment, right, we do have these laws on the books, but they can be changed. They can be tweaked. And if we look at the other states and the way that some of this country is going right now, I don't think anyone in New York wants the reproductive nightmare that's happening in red states all across the country. I don't think anyone in New York wants, like the don't say gay law that is going around in Florida right now and how that really affects these kids. I'm also going to say, trans people are like 0.06% of the population or something like that. There's not a lot of them. And New York state law already has laws on the books protecting trans athletes. So this isn't giving them rights that they don't already have. They already have those rights in New York state because, again, New York is New York and we think that everyone should have rights. And the boogeyman that is a transgender kid that wants to be on your girls' sports team, first off, go that kid. But I don't know many trans youth that have the confidence to be in a locker room and to get changed in front of everyone else. So I can't imagine this being as pervasive an issue as they say it is. And they do have that right. You might not like that right. You might not think it's fair, but they have that right. They have the right to participate in sports already in New York State, and not putting this through doesn't change that. It just means that the rights are going to be easier to take away from us because they're not protected in our Constitution. So one of the things that they keep pushing and saying is that if we pass this, we are taking away parental rights. And I just want to make very clear that that is absolute total nonsense. So our Constitution already protects parental rights to raise children as per their beliefs and values. And they also have constitutional rights to the care and custody of their children. So again, in this amendment, it says pursuant to the law, right? So it's not taking away your rights as a parent. It might make things happen in school that you don't agree with it as parents. But again, your right and your feelings don't counteract, like your rights are not more important than the rights of the community as a whole. And your feelings about something, if they are discriminating against someone, don't give you the right to be discriminatory. Like if it's discriminatory, it's discriminatory. And yes, telling people they can't play in sports because they're transgender or they're gay or whatever you want to say is discriminatory, and it's not allowed. Already it's not allowed. So the legal compliance part as pursuant to the law means that, the constitutional protection of parents is not going to be taken away. You can still take your kid out of school if you don't agree with that. That is your right as a parent, but you can't change the whole public education system because you don't agree with it. It's just, that's not how life works. And these things will be litigated in court, right? So if a parent doesn't agree with this, they can bring it to the courts, and it might get kicked all the way up to New York State's top court, which isn't our Supreme Court. That's our lower court. New York's weird, but I'm not a lawyer. I'm just a social worker. It will get litigated. So, they're also saying that this is by saying that national origin is a thing that you can't discriminate against, that they're trying to allow illegal immigrants to vote. No, it's part of our laws that illegal immigrants are allowed to vote. You have to be a citizen to vote. This doesn't mean that because they're not citizens, they now have the same right. These are all just fear-mongering tactics to try to get you to not vote yes and protect our rights. I wanted to specifically look at some of what the opposition is saying, guys. So there's a website called protectkidsnewyork.com. Sounds pretty good, but yes, lots of disinformation here. But some of their arguments, which I think are what people are hearing, is what I kind of wanted to debunk. So I'm going to share screen for those of you who are watching this on YouTube so that you can see what is being said. Okay. So some of their concerns, one, they're saying specifically that there's no constitutional necessity because they're already protected by other laws and it's redundant. But as I already said in this episode, there is a different standard of scrutiny for things that are protected, like non-discrimination clauses in our Constitution versus our laws. And our Constitution is something that is really, really hard to change, whereas laws can change anytime our legislators want to pass our laws. So the constitutional amendment is entirely necessary to ensure that the status quo that we actually want remains in place, because it would take multiple sets of legislators, like multiple legislative sessions, to change a constitution versus a law, which can be changed in like one legislative sitting. So it is constitutionally necessary. They also give a lot of it misinformation and like why it was written so poorly. They say that there's dysfunctional politics in Albany, and that it was a hasty decision with lack of thorough debate. Again, this took 2 legislative terms to make it through to even get on the ballot for us. So this wasn't a hasty decision. This has been over years. And I would argue that the vagueness of the language is due to Republicans. There are multiple Democrats. There was petitions that went through like all throughout the summer that tried to add the words abortion and LGBT to this amendment so that New Yorkers would know what it's about, right? Because that's the language that we use to describe these things, not reproductive healthcare access, not gender identity, not any of the other more vague language that is listed, but they're citing the vague language, but they're the ones that made it impossible for us to put very clear language on that ballot. So just know why it's that way, because they're throwing shade at the other side, but that was their doing. We wanted that on there. And they're saying that it can make common sense protections, which would allow states more authority than parents over their children's medical decisions. Again, this says pursuant to the law. So if parents are already given constitutional protections in our Constitution, right? And we have laws on the books that are saying that, parents have the right to participate in their children's medical decision making. Now, I will say in New York, there are some medical decisions that parents are not a part of. I know specifically as a therapist, in the case of rape, if it's not someone in the family or an adult, like teenagers do have the right to report and everything else without their parents know. And they do have a right to get an abortion or birth control access without their parents knowing. That is New York State law. But it's not changing the law. It's just, again, reinforcing our existing laws that no one has been up in arms about, because this is the way New York has always operated. Okay. And what they keep focusing on this website, a lot of it is about transgender issues and the state having the right to say that your child is entitled to a surgery, to sex reassignment surgery. Again, as a medical professional, a doctor is not going to make that choice without the consent of the parents and the child. It is very rare that people get sex reassignment surgeries before the age of 18 anyway, just because it is a very, very serious thing. We want to make sure that that is something that the individual is absolutely positive they want to do. In very rare cases, some people do it before 18, but there are significant indicators that this definitely is the good choice for that child and that their family is definitely on board. No one is advocating for sex reassignment surgeries. Also, are you worried that your kid is trans and is going to want to get a sex reassignment surgery and the state's going to approve it before you can't? Because if not, then I really don't know why you would vote no on something like this. Because it's a very small minority of cases or people that this is even going to affect, like parents who are worried about transgender surgeries. Like, first off, that isn't happening. No one's doing it without anyone's consent. And number two, if we look at the political landscape right now, I think it's really important to remember that our reproductive rights are on the line. Our right to love whoever we choose is on the line. Our right to be open about the fact that we are in the LGBT community and to feel safe doing so is definitely on the line. If the rest of the country is going this way and we don't take this very crucial step of putting these protections in our Constitution, what happens if we get just different legislators in? What happens if a bunch of New Yorkers are like, well, we're a blue state, so we're just going to sit out. We don't like either candidate. And all these people who are I would say a lot of them are uninformed as to what the actual consequences of things are, because there's a lot of talk in our politics about, a lot of people do this draw a line thing, simple solutions. And I'm going to tell you guys, as a business owner and as someone who studied history, there's no simple solutions. Things are highly complex. And it's not just this straight line. And in our politics, our politicians like to say, oh, if you do this, this will happen, right? Or this is a result of this. That's not always true. And there's a multitude of factors that contribute to everything. But it's harder to explain that to the public. And most people are disinterested, right? And I get that. But there's severe complexities to this, and there are significant implications if we do not take the time to get ourselves educated. And it's really important for us to really think about, like, if everything in this amendment is pursuant to the law, right? To the already existing law that these people are saying, we don't need it because it's in our laws already, right? We don't need this. It's in our laws. We don't need it. We're already protected. Why worry about it? Don't worry about it. Like, they don't want you to worry about it because those are not laws that they agree with, right? They don't agree with these laws. So they would like the opportunity to overturn them. And you know what happens if you put in our Constitution? If they went to change those laws, they wouldn't go through because they would be unconstitutional. But if you put it in our Constitution, in order to change those rights, they would have to make a constitutional amendment, which would take them 4 years, and which New Yorkers would definitely not be for. And in a 4-year time span, that would be squashed like a bug, right? So I think it's really important to think about people's intentions and why they're trying to sell things this way. Again, there are already laws in New York State that protect trans kids and allow them to be in girl sports. It's already a thing. So you want to talk about redundancy, or like things that you don't think are necessary. Like, you're preventing something that's already happening. And there's not that much buzz about it because it's not that common. It's not that common. So you want to talk about, like, what really matters. Let's talk about what's actually affecting people. And there are actually women dying because they don't have abortion care. And there are actually states that, you know, even in the states like New York, where we have our access, people's, like, access is still being affected because people in those states where they don't have access are coming here because they don't have providers. And now it's taking us longer to receive care, especially in low income communities where there are limited providers that accept the insurance and can fit these people in. So I think it's really important to think about, you know, what is actually happening in our universe right now. Like, what is really a right we need to worry about? And the right wants to say all the time, culture wars, culture wars, culture wars. We're not saying you have to accept everyone. We're not saying that you have to agree with everything we want. We're just saying that because you don't agree with us doesn't mean you get to censor us. We're not trying to censor you. You don't want trans kids in your school? Send your kids to private school. Send your kids to private school. This is a public services should be for the public. And because you don't agree with someone's lifestyle choices doesn't make them not a citizen. Point blank period. Doesn't make them not a citizen. Doesn't make them not entitled to those rights. Okay? So if you don't agree with how the vast majority of Americans feel about abortion care or sex education or LGBTQ rights, then you can isolate your family. But the rest of America shouldn't have to live in the dark ages because you don't want your children exposed to reality. And as a therapist, I'm going to tell you that not exposing your kids to things like there is no kid that is going to meet a trans person or a gay person and is going to be like, oh yeah, I'm gay now. If they weren't already thinking that. There's only kids that I know that happens to is if they already felt like they did not belong, already felt like they would never be accepted, and they were keeping this in and they were staying in the closet because they were terrified that everyone in their life would reject them. When they meet other people, yeah, it brings them hope, which is why the LGBT community is so very like pride and tell everyone who you are, because it does make a difference. Because in those communities, there's ridiculously high suicide rates. Why? Because people don't accept them and discriminate against them and bully them and belittle them and make them feel less than because of who they are as a human being. And if it's mind boggling to me that people will say, I have the right to not expose my child to that. I have a right as a parent to not expose my child to sex education. I'm sorry, but teenagers have sex. And if you don't want to expose them to sex education, the education they're going to get is from their peers. And for someone who worked in a high school with teenage girls, I once had a teenage girl tell me she thought she could get pregnant by someone ejaculating on her stomach and it absorbing into her uterus. Insane. But if we don't provide sex education, how are we going to keep our kids safe? They need basic sex education. And all of you that don't want it are too ashamed and bashful to talk about it at home, most of you. So they're not going to get it anywhere. And it leads to higher teen pregnancy rates and unwanted pregnancies and all of these other things that you're saying you don't want. So then let's have a country that's based on facts and science and what works, not just what you believe. Because what you believe or what is historic, there's a reason that things change over time. And not doing things because they make you feel uncomfortable. Maybe you should reflect and see why it makes you feel uncomfortable. What makes you feel uncomfortable about that? What makes you feel uncomfortable about your child having to play a sport with a trans kid? Why is that uncomfortable for you? Because a male's in the locker room? That person doesn't identify as male. Because they might have attraction to my female daughter and see her naked. Yeah, there's lesbians in the locker room too, and you can't ban them either. It's also just a part of reality. And if your kid is uncomfortable with that, and most of those kids, again, the LGBT community has a lot of shame and guilt and depression and all of these feelings as a teenager, especially when they're coming out and navigating the world with that label, because there are bigots in this world that make them feel less than for being part of that group. They're not drawing any unnecessary attention to themselves. I mean, most of the kids I know change in the damn nurse's office because they don't want to be, the center of attention. They are just human beings that are trying to function in their school environment like a normal student without having a giant sign on their back. There's no real fears other than your own fears. And I bet you if you asked your kids about that, they wouldn't be nearly as scared, because this generation is not terrified of the LGBT community because they realize that they're just other human beings that like the same sex. That's it. It's not a hard thing. And I think we really need to think about when we try to shield our kids, right? Or limit what information they get. That's a whole nother thing. Why are we trying to only give our kids one side? I don't want my kids to be sheep. I'm okay with my kids hearing your rhetoric. I'm okay with my kids hearing about, all the reasons that you support something that I am adamantly against. You know why? Because I teach my kid critical thinking skills, because that's an important thing for them to have in the world. Critical thinking skills. And when you only give your kid one version of a story, when they go out into the world, first off, as a child who only receives that, it could look like you were lying to them this entire time. And it also doesn't help them to navigate. And when they face opinions or things that are different than what they grew up with, it's going to be really hard for them to reconcile that. But I have never been afraid to give my kids both sides of an argument and the facts on both sides, because there are people that disagree with some of the policies that I disagree with, or that I agree with, and they have valid reasons for that. But I tend to lean one way or the other because of things that I think matter more. But it's not my job to teach my kid to think like me. It's my job to teach my kid to think, to form his own opinions, because that is how he's going to be a successful human in the world. If you are teaching your kid to only know what you think is safe for them to know, all that's teaching them is that you don't have confidence in them as a human being. You don't have trust that they know how to make the right decisions. You don't have trust that they'll come to the same conclusions as you. And that's, again, something you might need to ask yourself, okay, well, why is that? Why are you afraid of that? Because that is limiting your children. It is. They need to have critical thinking skills, and critical thinking skills are taught. And critical thinking skills cannot be taught if we keep our kids in a bubble. And for everyone out there that's saying, that children shouldn't have to deal with these things, let me tell you, kids deal with these things all the time. Children are sexually abused all the time. Children, they're 1 in 6 guys. That's 20%, or 1 in 5, 20% of our population experience sexual abuse in childhood. It's a fact of life. And by not educating our kids and not talking about anything, my kid is 6. We don't talk about, full blown, because that's not important, but we talk about good touch, bad touch. And we talk about, your private part is for you. And we have to be dressed. My kid hates clothes. He has sensory issues. He wants to be naked all the time. If I didn't educate my kid, he'd run outside naked and think that's perfectly fine because he just hates clothes. But I have to teach him, like, your body is yours. You have to protect. And there are people in this world that puts you in an unsafe situation. And you might think that's radical and crazy, but I work with kids with sexual abuse. And you know what? It's not the stranger on the street. It's usually someone they know. And I want my kids to be able to handle a situation without me there. I want my kids to have critical thinking skills. I want my kids to be able to think for themselves, to be able to act for themselves, to be able to protect themselves when I am not around, because I'm not always going to be around. Fact of life. My kids go to school, my kids go to daycare, my kids go to karate, they go to Boy Scouts, they go to all these places where I'm not necessarily right with them. And if I'm not teaching them what they actually should be afraid of and educating them on things that or giving them multiple perspectives on things, when someone says something to them, if your kids believe only one side because that's the only side they're ever given, what you're teaching them is to just believe whatever's taught to them. And we want our kids to question things because that's what creates productive adults. When we teach our kids to just go with what is taught, it creates sheep. It creates sheep. It creates people that go with whatever is going on, whether it is for them or not. It creates a sense of hopelessness. It creates this sense of you have no control over your life and you cannot change things because they don't have the ability to think things through and find all different solutions or different ways of doing things. A lot of what our kids do in adulthood is based on what we do at home and our modeling. And if you are not trusting your kid to learn information and come to you with that information and have a discussion, and you just want to silo that because you don't trust that they can make those right decisions, then that's probably an issue between your relationship with your kid. The point is, we don't want to silo our kids. Our kids don't need us to protect them in that way. Our protection of our kids is not limiting the information that they see or keeping them in a bubble. That's not actually protection, that's sheltering. And sheltering doesn't create very highly functioning adults. It creates very anxious people who don't trust their own judgment, and are going to have a much harder time navigating the rest of the world. We don't need to shelter our kids. We need to give them unconditional love and positive regard and be actually interested in what they have to say. If you want your kids to just believe one thing, it might be because you don't want to have to listen to the differing of their opinions. And our kids are going to have different opinions than us. And in order to maintain good relationships with them as parents, we need to respect their decisions. Sorry, very long rant, but I say all this to say the New York's Prop 1, abortion is on the line, LGBTQ issues are on the line, even if it's not listed in there. Even if they wouldn't let us use those actual words, that's what's up for grabs. That's what's up for grabs. It's codifying it in our state constitution. It's not changing any of the laws. It literally says as pursuant to the law. So nothing is going to change. It's just going to strengthen these laws. And that is important. It is important. And we should be making New York, New York, because this is what we already expect from New York. But honestly, the way that I look at this is like, this is make New York, New York. And I heard this in a video I was watching where someone else said, like, this act is literally should be called Make New York, New York. And it should, because New Yorkers believe that everyone should have, equal rights. We are very pro LGBTQ. We embrace that community. We're very women's rights. Like most New York women work. We're very different from the rest of the country. Many of us work several jobs, right? So New York is not a place where you would think that we need to put this in our constitution, but we do. And the fact that it's not there is kind of crazy. There are also multiple other states. I think there's 29 states that have an equal rights amendment in their constitution. And all of these fear-mongering things about trans kids being in sports and illegals being able to vote and whatever nonsense they want to say that this could open the door for this. Even if it opened the door for that, it would go through a legal battle, and it's as per the law, right? It's as per the statute. So even if there was a legal battle, it's going to follow the existing law. It doesn't make any immediate changes. And this is a bunch of fear-mongering tactics to strike this down, which would be devastating, because I just feel like as a New Yorker, we are supposed to be one of the most progressive states in the country. We're supposed to be the ones that are about the greater good for the community and immigrants and the blending pot and all of these things, right? Like we accept diversity. New York is diversity, right? Like that's what we're built on, guys. We are built on diversity. And this constitutional amendment is protecting our ability to have a diversity. And that is so crucial and so important. And I think that New Yorkers really need to, listen up. The Proposition 1 is something that we need to vote yes on. This is not about, kids in sports. This is about abortion care. This is about reproductive health care. This is about LGBTQ rights. This is about making sure that the laws that we already put in place in New York State that we are all proud of, that we have, we're one of the first places to do gay marriage. We have a lot of really progressive laws, and this just makes it so that they're in our Constitution so that some idiots can't get in there one voting season and dismantle it and bring us into the crap that's going on in those red states, because that's not New York. And I know New Yorkers would revolt. We might have a lot of Republicans here, but I know most of my New Yorkers are pretty socially liberal people, meaning like they are accepting of everyone else, right? But they're more fiscally conservative. New Yorkers are Republicans mostly because they don't agree with the tax hikes. And I can understand New York taxes are friggin' insane. But most New Yorkers, I feel like, are for this idea that we are all equal and everyone should be given a fair shot. And we embrace diversity and inclusivity and the differences within our communities, right? Because that is what makes New York amazing. It is. It's what makes us great. So New Yorkers, please go out there and vote yes on Prop 1. This is so very important for us to vote yes on Proposition 1, protecting women's rights, LGBTQ rights, the rights of disabled people, the rights of elderly people. It's a whole group. Many groups of people are going to be protected by this constitutional amendment. And it is very important. And it would be highly disappointing if, New Yorkers bought into the nonsense that is, this is going to ruin girls' sports or take away your parental rights or whatever. No, you still have those rights. It says as pursuant to the law. This is straight up fear mongering and misinformation campaigns designed to try to get you to vote no. But I don't know of any New Yorkers who truly, if we're looking at this, like, don't agree with that. Don't agree that women should have reproductive health care. So go out, guys, vote yes on Prop 1. Make New York, New York. Adding the ERA to our Constitution solidifies New York positions on equal rights for everyone. And that is New York. We believe in diversity. We believe in inclusion. We are such an amazing city because we have so many diverse groups living within us, and that creates this ability for us to just grow and flourish and find different solutions and blend. Like, I love New York. And what I've always loved about being a New Yorker is that I know that my fellow New Yorkers, we have the same common, I guess, belief systems. New Yorkers are hardworking. We are hustlers. We are, we're hardworking hustlers. And for us not to pass this would just be like the antithesis of everything that New York has always represented. So make New York, New York, guys. Make New York a place where women don't need to worry about abortion care, where gay people don't need to worry that they're going to have their rights taken away. Like, that is New York already. But let's just put it in the Constitution, guys. Let's just make it so that no crazy people can come in and try to change what we have going in New York. Because I think most New Yorkers like those situations the way they are there right now. And every other thing that people are worried about is, honestly, it's not that I'm not saying that these things can't be litigated, and they probably will. They probably will be litigated. But if it's pursuant to the actual law right now, I'm not really concerned, because all this is doing is making it so that we have a higher level of scrutiny for people who are facing discrimination. So it's basically taken more seriously. And it's looked at a little harder than if we don't have these constitutional protections. So it's just going to strengthen the rights that we already thought that we had as New Yorkers for most of us. But it's not taking away anything. And that's really, really important for people to know. Don't buy into the misinformation. Do your research, do your reading, vote yes on Proposition 1 for New York State.
Thank you for listening to Good Enough with the Trauma Therapist. We appreciate you listening. While our host may provide some personal and professional advice, we want to remind you that this show is for entertainment purposes only. Each individual situation is unique, and good enough is not a substitute for mental health treatment. If you need a therapist and are located in New York or Missouri, feel free to reach out to us at liendr.com or resilient-mo.com.